Let's bring in the front bench. Sabrina Grover was a federal Liberal candidate in the 2021 election. She's a senior advisor at Spark Advocacy and North Star Public Affairs. Melanie Paradis is former communications director to Aaron O'Toole. She's now the president of Texture Communications. Former interim NDP national director Carl Bélanger is here. He's now the president at Traction Strategies. And CTV News senior digital parliamentary reporter Rachel Aiello. Sabrina, let's start with you. And man, what Anthony Housefather said, is that how Liberals are really feeling?
I mean, maybe he did say the quiet part out loud, and I'm sure that's how a lot of people are thinking about it internally in their heads. But I think that what has actually been demonstrated by the Liberals in the last couple of weeks and months with this Team Canada approach, the recent trip to Philadelphia, with some of the other work that FPC and Minister Champagne has done in Minnesota and some of those other states, is that they are trying their best to bolster up support and bolster up their, defenses should a Republican presidency happen and should Donald Trump become president. So, I think that, some people might be thinking this, and a lot of people, I think, are reeling from what happened yesterday. I think it's pretty crazy that you have somebody who's a convicted felon running to be president, definitely unprecedented. But I think the actual approach that the government has taken is much more measured and much more controlled, and I think that that's going to be important in kind of setting up themselves for success, or whoever might be government in 2025 going down the road.
Yeah, and Melanie, obviously this government can't say what Housefather did, but do you think that they're changing their strategy based on that conviction?
No, and they shouldn't. They should assume that there's a very likely chance that Donald Trump will be the president of the United States again come January 2025. And that they're going to need to deal with him. This election is going to be incredibly close. And it was the first time he was elected. It was very close. So I think we can expect a similar outcome in terms of the number of votes. Obviously, the conviction. While people might say like, oh, this is it's crazy. How can anyone vote for someone who's been who's a convicted felon? And people have decided how they're going to vote in this election, for months, for years, many of them. This, I think, doesn't actually change anything in terms of vote intention for people who already knew if they were going to vote Republican or Democrat. It might change a little bit the motivation of swing voters, but swing voters have been, in swing states in particular, have been targeted by both parties for the past 2 years at least, and have been hearing consistent messages from both the Democrats and the Republicans, trying to figure out which way they're going to vote, which way they're leaning, persuading them. Because ultimately, this election is going to come down to like tens of thousands of votes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. Carl, earlier, or I should say last week, in Philadelphia, Kirsten Hillman, Canadian ambassador to the United States, had said, look, Trump doesn't worry us. But then what you had heard earlier in the show, former ambassador to the United States for Canada, Frank McKenna, says, yes, he does, and he should. Which one is it?
Oh, he does and he should, but you shouldn't say it. And that's the thing. Because the reality is that we've been through this movie before, and it was a very difficult relationship. Now, there's more to the Canada-US relationship than whoever is in the White House at any given moment. But the reality is that Donald Trump will make things difficult for Canada, for the Canadian government. Thankfully, I think the approach to diversify the support and to go into more into the states is a good one. We have a lot of Canadian friends in the northern states and even in some of the southern states. So I think you need to work on these relationships. You need to involve the provincial governments as well, so that they have those bilateral and multilateral links established, so that the one man that gets in power in the White House does not disrupt everything, because there's links that are stronger than that.
Yeah, and Rachel, one can make the argument that they were caught a little flat-footed last time, because some of them, even admitted they didn't expect Trump to get elected. Now with the Team Canada approach, they are really doing a full court press. But what's your sense of the calculations going on behind the scenes in PMO right now, especially considering what happened yesterday?
I believe that having the hindsight they do now is going to be helpful, because what we've clearly seen from Donald Trump today is that the Canadian government could go abroad and make this lovely gestures and try to secure all these relationships and do the proper diplomatic channels of securing the support. But at the end of the day, Donald Trump, if he hears one thing the prime minister might have said one time, that's going to be the little wrinkle that just sets him off. So we can make all of the preparations we want. But I think they are aware now, maybe in a way that they weren't before, that all of that work could get thrown aside if like the wind blows the wrong way and this guy gets a little bit upset. So they can make these preparations, but they have to also be aware that at the end of the day, it could be rather ineffective. And with Donald Trump, you never really know how he's going to feel about things. So I certainly think there's probably going to have to be some calculations about whether Liberal MPs can continue to say the kinds of things Anthony Housefather did. Well, yes, we're never going to hear the Prime Minister say that. It's not a far link to say that one of his MPs did. So that's going to have to be a calculation as well when they're talking about trying to frame Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre as Trump-like.
Yeah, and to that end, Sabrina, I wanted to ask you, do you think that inside the Liberal sort of strategy, wherever strategists are, I should say, do you think that part of them are actually hoping for that type of face-off with Trump and that he does get into the White House so they can have that stark thing and say, look, we handled Trump and, hey, the comparison, do you want, Pierre Poilievre to be your leader to go against Trump? Do you think that they are looking at their own political fortunes, Liberal strategists are, in seeing what happens in the United States and maybe, in a sense, going, hey, a Trump presidency wouldn't be so bad for us?
I mean, I think to Rachel's point, certainly this is a much more experienced team that has gone through this playbook once, and they've probably taken a ton of notes from that first time. So they know how to deal with Donald Trump and with some of those people a lot more today than they did, say, back when he was first elected. And I think that that's probably why you're seeing this Team Canada strategy be so fast and furious so early. And I think, it would even help the federal government to kind of expand that Team Canada to some of the provinces that do business with the United States heavily and start to build those relationships. I think that there's some benefit to having Donald Trump in office to bring that face-off mentality, but I think there's also a lot of risks, right? I mean, I think there's a lot of comparisons to be drawn between the way that the Republicans have acted in the United States and then the way that the Conservatives are acting here in Canada. But I think that there's also a thin line that you risk crossing if you make that comparison too heavily. Donald Trump does become president, and now we have to face the consequences of that, contrast that we were drawing. So I think it could be good, but I think what's better is if they just use the playbook to strengthen their, political backroom interactions with the U.S.
Yeah, and it could look also a little politically advantageous on their part if they try and make that comparison. But anyways, we're going to have to leave that one there for right now. We've got to take a quick break. But